Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us. I think this is probably the largest group of attendees we've had for one of these webinars, so I probably should say good morning to those folks who are listening in Japan and India. Good afternoon for anyone that's in Australia and New Zealand, and good evening for some of the few folks that we've got that are joining us from the US. Just a quick introduction for those who may not know who I am. My name's Mark Bragg. My business partner is Martin West, and we've been working together now for nearly 10 years, helping companies close the gap between what their plan or strategy says should happen and what actually occurs in practice. Just a few short housekeeping matters before I get underway. I realise you're all busy, you're in the middle of your work day, so I'm going to try and keep this to 20 or 30 minutes. There is the opportunity for interaction. Obviously, because of the time limits, we can't allow everyone to participate, but you will notice one of the icons on your screen there allows you to raise your hand. And I do have a few questions, and we'll try and include some of the folks that are online in the discussion. But if you have a question at any point, please just click on that icon, and if possible, if we have time, I'm going to try and get to as many people that have questions or comments as we can. This is actually being recorded, and we'll obviously post this link to you when we're done in case you want to share it with some of your teammates. Okay, so just a quick question for you to think about. I won't ask for answers just yet, but obviously we've got a lot of experienced folks on the line, and you will have experienced at some point some difficulty with executing strategy. So if you could just think about that for a minute while I do a short introduction to the challenge, and then I might come back and we might get a few comments from some of the folks that are online at the moment. So the challenge really is a pretty straightforward one, and I would say most businesses at some point face this. And that's trying to convert whatever your plan or strategy is into a great result, and being able to execute that strategy. And the thing about it is that what we, in theory, planning and strategy is very much a theoretical activity, whereas execution is really a little bit more about being the action that you can generate and the behavior you can get from your teams in order to try and execute that strategy. The other thing is that plans and strategy are quite static. You sit in a workshop or in a room and work with your teams to develop your strategy. But it is a very static thing, and as you would know from experience, as soon as you walk out the door, things begin to change. And so the execution of that strategy is quite dynamic, and if you're not prepared for that, it's quite easy for the strategy to come undone, and in some cases come undone quite quickly. So as I said, we've had a fair bit of experience with this, and most of what we've learned has come from watching our customers execute their strategy. And I think, in fairness, most companies do put a fair bit of thought into their planning and strategy, some more than others. But it is unusual for us to walk into any company and actually see that they have a very specific execution discipline. And that's basically something that I want to try and, in a very simple way, put across to you today. So let me just come back to this question. And I might just go, if anyone's got some thoughts on this, things that you think actually stop your team executing strategy, if you could raise your hand, and I might just go to you, and I see Rob Dawes. I'm just going to unmute you, Rob, so perhaps you could just give us your immediate thoughts on things that perhaps you've seen stop teams executing strategy in the past. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, Mark, in my corporate agribusiness role a couple of years ago, we had a new managing director join the business. He immediately set about implementing what in hindsight was an incredibly complex plan. And I think the front line, which is where execution really needs to happen, really failed to get real clarity around that strategy because it was just too complex. And with their failed clarity, we really just didn't get execution of his strategy. So I think clarity was a real issue in that case because of the complexity of the plan.
Terrific. Okay, let's. I'll just quickly go to maybe another couple. Alan, Alan Hill. Just unmute you. Al, please go ahead, mate.
G'day, Mark. Yeah, look, my background's in IT, and one of the things that I've come across is basically all the team members think they know what's best for the team, and so it's a little bit all over the place. They just go off and do their own thing because everyone thinks, despite what the managers asked for, well, they know what's really required.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit all over the place.
Good point. All right, I'm just going to go to one more, and Tom Sangster. Just let me unmute you. Go ahead, Tom. If you can, you just go ahead.
Pretty similar to the previous two, but I guess also having too much in the strategy.
Too much strategy, yeah, too complicated. Yeah, okay, that's good. So we couldn't quite hear Tom as clearly as we'd like to there. Okay, so look, if we were to ask any managers, they would normally come back to us with things like this. So let me just take you through a couple of key lessons that we've learned in doing this, and these lessons have become pretty much the key principles that we operate by anytime we work with any of our customers. And they're not rocket science, but if as a team you sort of fail to adhere to them, you're really setting yourself up for a difficult time in trying to execute your strategy. So the first one, which is sort of a bit of a response to some of the comments we just had, is the real need to keep things as simple as you possibly can, and avoid being complicated in what you're doing. As soon as you complicate something, your ability to execute it starts to diminish rapidly. And obviously, the more complex something is, the more that can go wrong with it. Now, it's quite easy for me to sit here and say, well, you need to keep things simple, but it is actually quite difficult. And as we get through this workshop, I'm going to talk a little bit about one very simple way that even if you're faced with a difficult challenge, you can break it down and keep it quite simple. So the first thing is keeping things very simple. A second one is, and this relates a little bit to people being confused or unclear on what the strategy is and perhaps what their role is. You need to be extremely clear, black and white, on the answers to three questions. And those three questions are, how are we actually going to measure our success? What would we need to focus on to deliver that success? And finally, what do each of us need to execute personally in order to help the team deliver on its objectives? If you have a black and white answer to those three things, you're in a pretty decent position as a team to start executing. But if there's any degree of grey, it just starts to create doubt, uncertainty, people's confidence level starts to drop, and it can become quite difficult even to get any traction on your strategy. So keeping things black and white and crystal clear. A third point, and most folks on the line that have any experience with sales will know this automatically, but there is a real need, I think, to be very specific about measurement. And measurement in my mind will drive most behavior. But that causes two questions to be answered. The first one is, you have to be very specific about what measures you select, because obviously if you select the wrong measures, you're going to get the wrong behavior. And secondly, you can't have too many measures. The more measures you have, the more you're going to disperse the effort. So you have to be very focused and very specific on what measures you're going to select. Now, related to that a little bit is my final lesson, final point, and that is you have to just be focused on what we would call high return targets. I think most teams we work with would tell us, look, we don't have enough time, we don't have enough resources. In fact, every single team we work with says that. And if that's the case, you have to be able to turn that around and say, well, if we've only got limited time and effort and resources, we better make sure what we do have is focused on those things that are going to give us the highest return for our time and effort. So, just four very simple points to think about. Keeping things simple, making sure we have absolute clarity, black and white clarity, selecting a few measures and making sure they're clear. And then finally, not trying to do 20 things or 30 things, but focusing on the 3 or 4 that are going to have the greatest impact on delivering your strategy. Now, I mentioned before, this is not always easy to break things down and keep them as simple and focused as me just sitting here and saying it. So one of the techniques that we've found quite useful is the rule of 3, which really forces you to a point where you try and bring everything down to just 3 fundamental points, 3 measures, 3 activities, 3 weekly challenges. As soon as you do that, and there is a little bit of science behind that, which I won't go into now, but the rule of 3 basically holds that with 3 points, it becomes much easier to communicate. People are more likely to understand it, and obviously, if they understand it, they're more likely to remember it, which in terms of executing strategy is terrific, because what you're trying to do is get people to remember things and stay focused on just a handful of things. So let's come back to the topic of the webinar, which is essentially trying to get from your strategy to the point of execution in just 3 steps. Notice the word I've used 3 again here. So those 3 steps are quite simple, and in the remaining 15 or 20 minutes, I just want to elaborate on each one. Again, if anyone has questions, please raise your hand. I'll try to get to them after I finish certain points, or we can have 5 minutes at the end of this. So those 3 points are, firstly, making sure that the people you have on your team are focused on the right things. Really, the only resource that you have to work with is your people, and you cannot afford to squander their effort or their time. So as a manager, if many of you are managers of your teams, there's just quite a bit of time and effort needs to be put into making sure that not only is the team collectively focused, but each member of the team knows precisely what the right things are. The second point is getting visibility on performance, being able to see what people are focused on and how they're progressing. And then the final point, and this is to deal with the dynamic nature of execution, making sure you have a very strong meeting discipline. So let me just break each of these 3 points down, starting with focusing on the right things. And really, the answer to this question is the beginning or a methodology from getting from a strategic document or an overall strategy to narrowing it right down to getting action and behavior at the front line. The first thing is just identify some key measurable goals, and I would recommend just 3. So answering that first question in black and white clarity, how will we measure success? Once you have that, the next question becomes, what would we need to focus on? What specifically is going to help us deliver on those metrics? What are the high return activities, the things that we would need to do as a team in order to deliver that? Again, black and white clarity is needed. And then the third thing is making sure that every person in the room is clear about what they personally need to execute. And we refer to this as a 90-day contract. It's a 1-page document, and I'll come to that shortly. But firstly, let's just have a quick look at what teams might select in terms of measurable goals. Now, I know we've got a fairly large group online here, as I said in my introduction, so I'm sure you'll have a variety of different enterprises in which to try and come up with some measurable goals. But let me just give you 2 sort of diametrically opposed teams, or not opposed teams, but 2 different teams, and show you what they might come up with. First one is an easy one. It's kind of a sales team, and anyone involved in sales will have measures like this. A sales objective, a target of, in this particular case, of 250,000, and perhaps currently they're at 84,000. Trying to get a margin on their product of 15.5%, currently at 12.3%. And maybe there's a measure around new product sales, trying to sell a certain number of units, in this case 2,500, and they've sold 542. Usually sales is quite easy, but there are other teams that are a little bit more difficult, and I've just used one here. For example, a finance team. In this particular case, and this is a real example, this particular team had to get the annual budgets out in a certain time frame. Their target simply was to try and get 100% of the budgets from all the departments and the divisions ready on time. Audit errors, they had some problems with audit errors. They had a challenge to try and get that down to zero. And they were at the time implementing a new accounting system. Now, the way they've put a metric on that is to say, look, there are 5 specific milestones that we have to achieve in a certain time. And so 5 is going to be our measure. We have to meet each of those milestones in order to deliver the accounting system. So they're just simple examples. And I think the challenge for any of you who are trying to do this with your team is to make sure you've identified the not all the measures, certainly not 10 or 15. Try and break it down to just 3. I guess you could at different times except 4, but for most teams, 3 we've found works best, and the 3 measures obviously that mean most to you. So let's go to the very next question, which is high return activities, and I think this is really where most of the debate should take place, either with the senior group that's trying to determine what they want the team to do, or even with the team itself. This is always a good discussion. So let me explain this, and some of you that have worked with us before will have seen this diagram, but let me explain high return targets or high return activities in this way. The dots you're looking at on a screen, imagine for a moment that was representative of internet usage in a small town, and the green dots were home users, the black dots were business users, and the red dots were servers. If you wanted to impact that system, clearly you would go after a red dot. You could potentially maybe attack one of the black dots, but that would only impact that dot and perhaps the one beside it. But if you were able to impact one of those red dots, you would severely impact that system. And if you were actually able to attack all 5, you would change that system permanently. So let's forget for a moment that it's actually representative of the internet usage. Let's think now in terms of your specific team. These are all the things that you could do. All these dots represent all the things you could do as a team to achieve your measurable goals. So the question becomes, what are the red dots? What are the things that are going to have the greatest impact on your ability to deliver on your measurable goals? So let's have a look at what that looks like for our example teams. And again, fairly simple, straightforward things that you might normally see. For the sales team, what are they going to focus on? Their high return activities are key accounts, A-class customers, promotional events, and sales training. They've kind of broke with my convention here of going with 4 things instead of 3, but nevertheless, I think this team particularly thought that those 4 were all important. The finance team, what do they need to focus on? Well, obviously one of them is general managers because they're working with the managers to get their budgets done. Some staff training, particularly in terms of audit errors and things like that. And they wanted to introduce an audit checking system as well. So this is just an example of these 2 teams saying, look, our high return activities are these 3 or 4 things. We're saying that if we do really well on these, if we execute well on these, it's going to give us the best possible chance of delivering on those measurable goals. So let's go to the last question, which is in the beginning. What we're doing here is just trying to make sure everyone's focused on the right things. And that is, what do I need to execute? And I mentioned here about a 90-day contract. For us, strategy needs to be broken down into very simple, straightforward steps for each individual in the team, and not a list of 30 things, but over a 90-day period, 3 or 4 very key things that are the most important for that particular individual to deliver. So 90-day contract is a very simple, straightforward document. It just lists on the left-hand column 3 high return activities for this particular individual. It outlines an outcome, a very measurable outcome, which is related directly to activity. And you can see in the right columns the actual target measure and the current measure. So in the sales example, they're obviously focused on key accounts, A-class customers, and promotional events. You'll see the way the outcome is written that it obviously leads to having a very specific number or measure attached to each one of those high return activities. And what you're doing here is firstly ensuring that this particular person is focused on three very important things, that it's very clear what's expected, and it's also clear how they're progressing. Again, sticking with our keeping things simple, black and white, hitting the high return targets, and making sure we've got key measures that are going to drive behavior. Let's have a quick look at what it might be for a finance person. Again, very specific high return activities, measurable outcomes, and then some measures on the right. Now you will notice down the bottom the introduction of a new accounting system, and the way that's been measured is we've asked that particular individual to list the 4 specific things they will need to do to introduce this new accounting system, the 4th one being delivering a recommendation to management. Again, the measure there becomes 4. That again allows us to provide very specific, clear objective. So just coming back to where we started, the 3 points, and that I've just tried to cover off one there, which is saying, right, to get people focused on the right things, we need black and white answers to how will we measure success, what we will need to focus on, and what specifically is each person going to execute. So let's go to the second one, and this for us is probably the most powerful thing in terms of execution, because you could do everything in that first one, and if it wasn't visible, if it was hidden and people didn't know what folks were doing, it would probably lose a lot of its influence and power. But if you make visible what people are focused on, 2 things happen. The first thing is, if everyone is very clear about what people are focused on and how they're progressing, the level of accountability goes up dramatically rather than things being hidden. And we've often seen this occur quite quickly in teams. As soon as it's very clear, even right throughout, say, a nationwide sales team, if you're very clear about what the results are and who's focused on what, level of accountability goes up, and along with it, the ability to execute. Now, there is another thing which is very important in terms of visibility, and this is specifically for people who are managing teams. And what we often see is folks that are perhaps sometimes flying blind. Let me try and give you a graphic illustration. I don't know how many people online here have ever coached a sporting team, but just for a moment, imagine you were sitting on the sidelines coaching a sporting team, and you could see the scoreboard, but you couldn't actually see the team playing. In other words, you could see the scoreboard ticking over. Perhaps you're in front, perhaps you're behind, but you couldn't actually see what was driving that score. You couldn't see the team playing. Now, if you had to go in at half time and give some advice and direction to that team, how difficult would it be? Almost impossible. And very often that's what we find in many businesses, that people are watching the scoreboard, the profit, loss, market share, those sorts of things, but haven't been able to see exactly what's driving those results. They haven't been able to see the activity or the behavior. So the second thing about visibility is that visibility will improve your ability to make good decisions. If you can see exactly what is driving a result and be able to change specific activity and behavior, then you're in a much better position to actually drive the execution of your strategy than if you're flying blind. So let me just give you an example of how we deal with this in the companies that we work with. And I know they have some online, some folks that are aware of this, others that won't be. We've got an application that makes all this extremely visible. Let me show you what that looks like. So what you're looking at is a sales team, and those 3 questions that I just raised earlier about getting people focused on the right things are basically revealed right here on this screen. It shows their measurable goals over 90 days, their high return activities, and it actually shows what each person is focused on in summary. The beauty about this is you can actually move from one team to the next in a company and see exactly what every single person is focused on at any one time. And if you wanted to see exactly what they were doing over 90 days, you could just click on their contract and you will see the 90-day contract that I spoke about before will appear. And you can see that quite clearly. Again, you can navigate from one team to the next quite easily and see precisely exactly what people are focused on, exactly what the team is trying to do and how they're progressing and how each individual is doing. You'll also notice in the right-hand side there a little thing called roadblocks. And we think that also is pretty important in terms of trying to execute strategy, that you have complete visibility on what the roadblocks are, the things that are stopping the team executing strategy. So let me now come to the very last point here, and that's trying to build a strong meeting discipline. And I'd have to say that if we want to get any evaluation of how a team is at executing strategy, we really only have to go and sit in a team meeting to get a bit of a feel for whether they're really on the ball or whether they may be struggling. And for us, there are probably 3 key meeting agenda items that we are looking for, as well as the way in which the meeting is conducted. So let me just go through each of those 3 meeting agenda items. The first one is the actual progress of the team in terms of their overall objectives has to be discussed. I think if that is not on the agenda at every meeting, even if there are only slight improvements in progress, then in some ways you're doing the team a disservice and you're taking some focus away of what the actual intention of the team is in the first place. The second thing is that each person's individual progress in some way should be discussed. Things that are going well for them, things that they're struggling with, perhaps any potential roadblocks they may have individually. But again, that really should be front and center. And then finally, roadblocks. And that for us is a specific topic in terms of execution. I will make one comment about roadblocks. We sat with a company in New York recently, and the head of division would, at the end of each meeting, raise roadblocks as a key topic and would really press his team to give him the things that were stopping them performing or the things that were stopping them executing. Having got that list, he would then spend the next 24 hours just working on that list. He wouldn't do anything else. Now, I think there's a good message there. One, that's a great leadership trait to have. And secondly, what he's really doing is removing any possibility that there are things out there that may stop people actually delivering on what they're trying to do in their 90 days. So again, I'm just going to go quickly back to our application and show you a little bit. I won't spend much time on this, about 1 minute, just on how that looks, this team meeting on our online application. So what you're seeing there is what we call the meeting room. And you'll see the agenda is listed down the left-hand side there. The team goals, when you click on that, they come up and you can have a quick discussion on that. Roadblocks, when they're clicked on, they can come up and discussed. And then each person's 90-day contract and how they're actually progressing. And you'll also notice there something that we've introduced more recently in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and 2 or 3 months, and that is putting a real focus on top 3 actions of the week and trying to connect those actions to the specific objectives of that person and of the team. Again, this just brings another level of clarity. So the meeting normally is finished with what are your weekly top 3? What are the things that for you in terms of trying to help this team deliver are going to be the things that are most important in delivering our strategy. And again, this is trying to take away stuff, trying to make that busy environment simple, and making sure people are very clear about what's most important. So, a quick summary. just being able to break your strategy down and get people focused on the right thing by answering those 3 questions I mentioned. How are you going to measure success? What do we need to focus on? What do I personally need to execute? Getting some visibility on performance, knowing exactly what people are focused on and how they're progressing, and then finally building a very strong meeting discipline in order to make sure you stay on top of the varying changes that are going to occur from day to day. So I've gone close to the 20 minutes, I think, or maybe on towards 30. As I said before, you've each got a chance here to perhaps ask some questions. So if you want to, for those who came in a bit late, if you want to raise your hand, anyone, we've got about 5 or 10 minutes here to go. So please raise your hand if you've got a question. I see, Tom, you've still got your hand up. I might just unmute you, and if you've got a comment, please go ahead. Hello.
No, sorry, no, I'm not sure.
You're good? All right, let me just go. I think I might just go back to Rob. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, Mark, I get the benefits of having the team focused on those high return activities as being critical, but I reckon every one of us on this hookup will get 50 or 100 things hit our in tray, our inbox or our phone every day. What's the key in your mind in keeping the team focused on high return activities?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is twofold. I think first of all, obviously you have to be very clear on your measurable objectives. If you've got those clear, that actually solves a lot of the problem of clutter. Because then when you ask your team, or even if you're considering for yourself, look, what do I really need to do now? Or what do I need to focus on this week? If that doesn't have any connection, what you've decided to do doesn't have any connection to the overall team objectives, you really have to seriously question it. So for me, the qualification is this really going to help us win? Is this really going to help us get, move that number or improve what we're trying to do? And if it doesn't line up with what we're trying to do as a team, then you probably have to discard it or at least challenge the need to do it. I don't know. Does that answer your question, Rob?
Yep, thanks, Mark.
Okay, good. I might just go to one more. Al, I'll just bring in Alan here real quick. He had a few comments at the start. Alan, you have any comments?
No, I think actually you did address the issue that I raised about the everybody just sort of going off and doing their own thing. I think that visibility and accountability helps a lot there that you were talking about in the I think it was the second point.
That's great. Terrific.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Thanks, Al. Anybody else online here at the moment that again, you just raise your hand if you have a specific question. Okay, so let me just explain quickly the next steps here. In the next day or so, I'm just going to email you a copy of a video of this webinar. So if you want to share it with any of your team, please feel free to do so. If you've got any questions, obviously you can reply to that email. And also, we've got a set of strategy to execution workshops coming up in December and January. So I'll put a list of those in there, and if any of you are interested, you can always email me back. Our next webinar is on Friday the 23rd at 1 p.m. And in that, I'm just going to focus on the meeting discipline. I kind of touched on it today a little, but there are some very specific points that I think might help that we've actually learnt by watching. We're watching some bad meetings, but also at the same time watching some people conduct some very, very good meetings. And we've got 4 or 5 points there that we think might be useful to you. So thanks again, everyone, for being online. As I said, this is by far the biggest attendance we've had. And again, you'll get an email from me in the next 24 hours. And if you need any more information or just want me to jump on the phone or email or Skype, I'll be more than happy to do so. But thanks again very much for attending. Appreciate it. Have a good rest of the day.